Hi there, Jack here from Bridge Coffee Roasters, and this is the SP9. It's an automatic filter coffee maker designed for cafes to help them serve incredible, fresh, delicious coffee one batch at a time. It's incredibly easy to use, simple and intuitive, and it can help any barista serve delicious filter coffee without needing a degree in pour overs. Cafes that want to serve filter coffee usually have one of two options. Firstly, a large batch brewer that can brew something like 1 to 5 litres at a time, or a manual pour over for brewing single servings. Large batch brewers are very easy to use and are great at making large batches of delicious coffee, but they're usually quite slow and not very good with single servings. Manual pour overs are really good at making 1 to 2 delicious cups of coffee, but they can be quite hard to use and they take a good amount of practice and skill to get delicious coffee out of them. The SP9 sits somewhere in the middle and gives you the best of both worlds. It essentially replaces the role of the barista, so you can make delicious pour over coffees for 1 to 2 people at any one time, but it's completely automated. So once you've dialed in your recipe, there's no skill involved. You just get repeatable, delicious coffees, and you can serve a number of different coffees on your menu that are all brewed fresh and don't have to sit in a large batch brewer for a long period of time. So let's get into the features and benefits of the SP9 and give you a great recommendation for a starting recipe for 1 cup of delicious filter coffee. So the SP9 comes in 2 main parts. Obviously you've got the brew head, which sits on top of the counter, and this is the thing that you're going to mainly interact with on a daily basis. The boiler sits right underneath the brew head and is where you set the main temperature for the brew, which you can adjust in the settings by holding the 2 buttons, letting go for a second, and then you can set the temperature. Using the top button, you can scroll through the menu, and with the bottom button, you can add to the temperature, and it will reset down to 60 when you go too far, so you can just add back. And I'm keeping that at about 93, 94 degrees for a light roasted coffee. Just scroll down, save and exit. And when it's reached that temperature, which from power off takes about 25 minutes usually, the boiler will say that it's ready to brew. The boiler is connected to the brew head by 3 different tubes. So you've got 2 water lines where the water is going to go up through one and down through the other to recirculate the water and get it through to that proper brewing temperature. And then also a vent line as well. Once you've set the temperature in the boiler down below, the brewer is going to do absolutely everything it can to make sure it's sticking to that brew temperature. So the water doesn't just come up from the boiler and straight into the brew, but it actually constantly recirculates the water from the top of the brew head down into the boiler to make sure that it's staying at a consistent temperature. The brewer is quite easy to install, but it does require that you drill through the counter in order to get the lines down into the boiler. So just make sure you're taking that into account when you're deciding where to place the brewer. So the boiler is where you set the temperature down below, and on the brew head is where you control the brew time and the dose of water going in. On the bottom dial, you set your time in minutes, and typically I like to keep that quite low at about 1.5 minutes, and that'll just mean it's pouring the water quickly into the brew and keeping it nice and hot and topped up during the brew. And then on the top is where you set your dose of water, and each number equates to about another 100 ml. So for a single serving, I'll set it at about the 2.5 mark for about 250 milliliters of brew water. And for 2 people, where I want about 500 ml, I'll set that to about 5. And you can set the brewer up to about 750 ml, so you can brew 3 batches of coffee if you like. The brew volume will be split up into 9 separate pours down from the shower screen, and the amount of water and the time between those pours just depends on the volume and the time that you've set for the brew. So the SP9 is a perfect size for brewing a 1 or 2 cup V60, and it can also fit a decently sized Chemex as well. But if you've got a brewer that doesn't come with its own carafe or doesn't sit nicely on top of a cup, they also provide you with this nice little magnetic stand that clips directly onto the front of the brewer. So you can have any kind of flat bottom or cone brewer there, as long as you've got a mug or a carafe underneath. You've also got a drip tray right underneath, which is great for pouring out any rinse water or any wastage, and that just goes directly into a waste pipe down below. So those are all the features, and now let's dive into our recommended recipe for a delicious single serving of coffee. So for this recipe, I'm going to be brewing a single cup of coffee with a V60. And for that, I'm going to use 15 grams of medium fine ground coffee. If you want to brew for 2 people, you can scale that up to 30 grams, and for 3 people, 45. I'm going to get rid of that magnetic thing and just have the V60 sitting on top of my carafe. For the 2 dials, I'm going to set my time down to 1.5 minutes and my dial for volume to about 2.5. So that'll give me 250 ml of brew water for a single serving. And I like to do it in 1.5 minutes just to brew a little bit faster. That lets me grind a little bit finer and keep the brew slurry topped up quite high to maintain a nice high temperature. On the boiler down below, I'm using a relatively light roast coffee, so I've got that set to 94 degrees. If you've got a medium roast, maybe take that down to 90 and a dark roast 85. But the great thing about the Brewer is that it just is really consistent, so you can tweak all of your brew ratios and grind sizes and temperatures, and the brew head will make sure that it's doing everything else really nice and consistently. So first, just gonna grind my coffee nice and fresh. So got that ground, and my first step is to add a little bit of rinse water into the brewer. So I'm just gonna start the brew, and this is just a normal step in manual pour over, which you don't have to do, but it helps to preheat the brewer a little bit and get rid of some of that papery taste from the filter. It'll also preheat the carafe a little bit as well to make sure you can serve that coffee nice and hot for your customers. So after just a few pours, I'm just gonna turn that off. Let it drain and then just discard that water into the waste. Then gonna add my finely ground coffee into the V60. Give it a nice shake to level the bed. Place it underneath right in the center of the drip tray and then start my brew. So it's gonna take about 1.5 minutes to pour all the water through the carafe. And in this time, you can really just interact with the customer and you don't have to take care over the brew. You can give it a few swirls during the bloom if you like to make sure all the grounds are properly saturated. But the brewer is going to take care of absolutely everything else for you. It's going to be really consistent and give you a delicious coffee down below. So as a barista during a busy service, this is going to eliminate a lot of the annoyances with doing a single serve pour over. So you have to stand over the brewer for about 3 to 5 minutes to get a delicious coffee. You also have to use a scale to make sure you're weighing out the water, and you also have to wait for the kettle to preheat. The SP9 just gets rid of all of those steps and let you brew a delicious cup of coffee really quickly and really consistently, even if you don't have much training when it comes to filter brewing. So once it's done its last pour, you'll see the water draining through the top, and then it'll beep to let you know you're finished. And that will just take a few more seconds just to drain completely out of the brewer, and then you'll be ready to serve. So after about 3 minutes in total, we are now ready to serve a delicious cup of freshly brewed filter coffee for our customers. So if I wanted to make any changes to that recipe, like grinding a little bit finer or decreasing or increasing the time or the brew ratio, then I can do that directly on the brewer or the grinder. And once I've got everything dialed in, then it's just set it and forget it for your baristas. All they need to do is to grind the coffee and then start brewing. So the SP9 lets any of your baristas brew an incredible cup of filter coffee, even if it's their first day and they've had no training whatsoever. And it lets you provide a decent menu of different coffee options for all of your customers, and you can be ready to brew any of them at a moment's notice. So that is the SP9 by Marco. If you want to buy one for yourself, then head to the first link down in the description. And if you have any more questions about the brewer, then feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, then please feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll see you in the next video.